Hey, hi, hello. This is the story of Laci Peterson and her tragic ending. My daughter presented from this morning. She was pregnant. She took her dog for a walk to a park. Dog came home with some police shots. What is your name? My name is Ron. Her husband, Scott Peterson, is on going to the park. What's your daughter's name? Lacey Peterson.
Christmas of 2002 was unlike any other in Modesto, California. Instead of the usual festive greetings and treats, determined dairy farmers scoured neighborhoods and farm fields on foot and horseback in search of 27-year-old Laci Peterson, who had been 7 months pregnant. Laci's family and friends established a mission control center at a downtown hotel. They distributed around 25,000 flyers to an army of eager volunteers. The effort to find Laci extended far beyond Modesto, reaching places like Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, and even Mexico, where her smiling face appeared on shop windows and utility poles as the case made national headlines. Who was Laci Peterson, and where did she go? In the heart of sunny California, where golden fields stretch as far as the eye can see, a small city called Modesto lies nestled amidst the tranquil embrace of the Central Valley. It's a place where the pace of life gently mirrors the flow of the nearby Tuolumne River. Its tight-knit community thrives on its strong sense of unity and family values that run deep. Modesto's tree-lined streets and charming neighborhoods provide an idyllic setting for families to put down roots. This was the place where Laci Peterson chose to settle down. Little did Laci know that the serene landscape of Modesto was capable of hiding dark and ugly secrets too. This tale begins with the love story of Laci's parents, Sharon Anderson and Dennis Robert Rocha. They were high school sweethearts who tied the knot and became the proud owners of a dairy farm near Escalon, California. In 1971, they had their first baby, who they named Brent Rocha. Then, Sharon was pregnant once more, and on May 4th, 1975, their family was blessed with the arrival of a baby girl. She was named Laci Dennis Rocha. She had been a happy person since childhood, and her beautiful smile captivated all who knew her. Right from the time when her mother, Sharon, would pick her up out of the crib. Unlike other babies who cried a lot, Sharon always found Laci smiling. Laci grew up working on the family farm with her mother. Every love story has a happy ending, and that's what happened in the case of Laci's parents, Sharon and Dennis. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she moved with her mom to Modesto. Her mom later married Ron Gransky, who played a big role in Laci and her brother Brent's lives from a young age. Laci attended Downey High School in Modesto and had fun with friends at sneaky slumber parties with drinks. They would all end up super drunk, yet somehow Laci always managed to attend school the next day. Later, she pursued her passion for ornamental horticulture, earning an outstanding freshman award at California Polytechnic State University after her 1993 graduation. While Laci was maturing and pursuing her studies, on the other side of town, Laci's husband-to-be was also beginning his adult life. Born on October 24th, 1972 in San Diego, California, Scott Peterson was the only child of Lee and Jackie Peterson, who had 6 children combined from previous marriages. Jackie's difficult childhood, marked by her father's murder and being raised by nuns, inspired her to provide the best possible life for her children. As a kid, Scott lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in La Jolla, California with his family, and shared a room with his half-brother John. Scott was deeply passionate about golf. At just 14, he was already beating his dad at the game. He even dreamed of becoming a pro golfer at one point. He went to college at Arizona State University in 1990 on a partial golf scholarship, but made a mistake when he took another golfer, Chris Couch, for drinks when Chris was visiting the university for a possible spot on the golf team. As a result, Scott was removed from the team. Even so, his professors had only good things to say about him and thought he was a model student. Scott worked at Pacific Cafe in Morro Bay during college. Laci saw Scott while visiting a friend who worked there and made the first move. In mid-1994, she gave Scott her number, even telling her mother he was the one. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip where Laci got seasickness. It would have been a bad date ideally, but for them, it was memorable. Within 1 week, Sharon, Laci's mother, finally got to meet Scott. Laci took her mother to the Pacific Cafe where Scott had gone out of the way to make both the ladies feel special. He had placed a dozen red roses for Laci on the table, and, to add to the charm, he placed a dozen white roses for Sharon as well. He definitely received some brownie points for that. After that, Laci knew she was in love. As their relationship got more serious, Scott decided to put his dreams of becoming a pro golfer on hold so he could focus on building a career in business. They dated for about 2 years and then decided to move in together. In 1997, after Laci finished college, they got married at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. Scott graduated in 1998, and they started a sports bar called The Shack. Later, they moved to Modesto, California, and bought a house. Laci substituted as a teacher, and Scott got a job at a fertilizer company. With Scott's good income, Laci embraced homemaking. Her days began with walking her dog Mackenzie, followed by cooking, hosting friends, and enjoying Martha Stewart's shows. Everyone thought that Laci could not smile any wider, but that changed in 2002. When Laci found out she was expecting a baby, due on February 10, 2003. Laci was overjoyed. The parents-to-be had already decided to name their son Connor. But Laci would soon learn that not all fairy tales have happy endings. On December 23, 2002, Laci and Scott had a busy day. They went to Salon, where Laci's sister Amy worked. They had been going there every month for Scott to get a haircut. Scott also offered to pick up a fruit basket for Amy and bought his wife a lovely present for Christmas. Laci's mother Sharon talked to Laci on the phone around 8:30 that evening. Then the next day, on Christmas Eve 2002, Laci did not pull open the curtains like she usually did. It was one of the little things that Laci did that the neighbors noticed was off. However, Scott saw Laci at around 9:30 a.m. when he was leaving the house. She had been watching a Martha Stewart show about meringue and getting ready to mop the floor, bake cookies, and take their dog Mackenzie to the nearby park as she did every day. Strangely, around 10:30 a.m., Laci's neighbor, Karen Service, found Mackenzie loose in the front yard with its collar and leash still on. Laci was nowhere around. Another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, saw Mackenzie at about 10:45 a.m. while playing with his own dog. It was definitely odd. It was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. At some point, one of the neighbors who knew Mackenzie put her back in her own yard, believing she had accidentally gotten out. Scott left a message for Laci at 2:15 p.m., telling her that he was leaving Berkeley. After returning home that afternoon, he noticed Laci's car in the driveway. Yet the house was empty, but Mackenzie was in the backyard. Scott went to ask some neighbors if they had seen Laci. When the neighbors asked him if he tried calling her, Scott replied in affirmation and told them that he had gone out golfing that day, and now his wife was missing. Scott called his mother-in-law Sharon to check if Laci was with her. That was the first time that Sharon was alerted that her daughter, Laci, had gone missing. She knew that Laci was not the type of person to go somewhere without informing someone. So Scott and Laci's stepfather both reported her missing, and police received the report shortly before 6 p.m.
Yeah, my daughter presented stuff this morning. She went pregnant. She took her dog for a walk to the park. Dog came home with some police dogs. What is your name? My name is Ron. Her husband got Peterson. The dog went to the park. What's your name? Laci Peterson.
Police could sense something amiss with the case and had their suspicions of foul play quite early on. Modesto police detectives Alan Brocchini and John Buell, who were leading the investigation, went to the Petersons' home after they received the missing person call. When they got there, they found Laci's keys, wallet, and sunglasses in her purse inside a closet. That clearly meant that Laci had not planned to go out, and also, it meant that this was not a robbery case either. By now, many people had gathered around the Peterson house. Whenever someone new came and asked Scott where he had been when Laci went missing, he always replied saying that he had gone golfing. In such cases, detectives usually look to the spouse first. However, Scott managed to deflect suspicion when his in-laws and Laci's parents vouched for him, painting a picture of Scott and Laci as the perfect couple. But then, how did a young woman who was 7.5 months pregnant suddenly disappear? The day after Laci went missing, on Christmas of 2002, the Modesto police and firefighters began a large search mission along Dry Creek. They pulled out all the stops, using helicopters with searchlights, officers on horses and bikes, police dogs, and even water rescue teams on rafts. About 30 officers were involved, along with Laci's family, friends, and volunteers, who put up flyers to spread the word about her disappearance. Laci's close friends, with whom she had grown apart from over time, all came together to join the search. She had brought them together once again, like she did in high school. Only this time, Laci herself was not there. Scott had called many of them, asking if they'd seen Laci on Christmas Eve, but none had. They flocked to her house, the very place where they had shared countless joyful moments. Laci's friend, Renee Tomlinson, said, "It just wasn't right. This was not a sad place. To be sad at her house, just wasn't right." Laci's immediate family and friends organized the initial search and a later vigil. In the first couple of days, almost 900 people were out looking for Laci before the police and community officials joined in, and before it became a big news story nationwide. The Carroll Son Carrington Memorial Reward Foundation, along with help from Laci's family, offered a reward of $25,000, which was later increased to $250,000 and then to $500,000 for any information that could help find Laci. They made posters, tied blue and yellow ribbons, and spread flyers. They also set up a basic website called LaciPeterson.com, which was started by a friend's husband. All of her dear ones and random volunteers worked together at a nearby Red Lion hotel, where they kept track of any updates and shared information. More than 1,500 volunteers signed up to help distribute information and search for Laci. Everyone was tense and wanted desperately to know how, why, and what had happened to Laci. Naturally, the case quickly grew to the attention of the national media. The public was sympathetic towards Scott. After all, his wife and unborn son had just vanished. However, as the police investigation continued, sympathy was quickly replaced by suspicion. The very first doubts about Scott began to percolate in Detective Bueller's mind early on in the investigation. He had his suspicions about Scott from the very first time he met him. It wasn't necessarily he thought Scott was guilty, but Scott's calm and composed demeanor struck him as odd. Scott didn't ask questions like, "Can you give me your contact details?" or "What's the plan now?" Detective Bueller described Scott as a bit of a mystery. He seemed polite, yet arrogant, distant, yet impatient. Scott didn't appear to be deeply upset or disturbed by his wife's disappearance, which raised some red flags. But again, after handling many such cases, detectives are well aware that everyone grieves differently. It was officially time to look into and track alibis. The first in line was the spouse, Scott.
You have no idea where this is. Just tell me about the morning.
I got up at, I don't know, 8 o'clock probably or so. Showered. We were watching her favorite show, Martha Stewart. A little bit of that. They've been married 4 years. Yeah. 4 or 5. I guess it's 5. I think we're married in 97. So you were married in 97? Please.
Unlike what he mentioned to others, he told police he had gone fishing for sturgeon in his new 14-foot aluminum boat at the Berkeley Marina, which was about 90 miles away from their home in Modesto. During questioning, Scott remained calm. He did not seem impatient or angry with the detectives for wasting their time on him, nor did he seem remotely concerned. The doubts were now piling up. So the police immediately organized a search into Scott's background. By this time, it had already been about a week since Laci disappeared. Then, on December 30th, 2002, a woman named Amber Fry, a massage therapist by profession, was watching the news when she realized that she knew the man on the screen. She knew Scott very well. In fact, she was dating him. So it was an utter shock for her when she found out that Scott's wife had been missing, because Scott told her he was a widower. Was that a mere coincidence, or had Scott already been planning his wife's demise? Amber immediately notified the police. During her interview with detectives, she detailed that they had met on November 20th, 2002. At that time, Scott portrayed himself as an eligible bachelor. But after almost a month, on December 9th, he confessed that he had previously been married, but his wife had died. Scott appealed to Amber's emotions by telling her that it would have been his first Christmas without his wife, which of course turned out to be true. Amber agreed to help the investigators by allowing them to record her conversations with Scott on the phone, hoping to get him to confess. On January 15th, 2003, the police informed Laci's immediate family about Scott's affair and showed her mother Sharon and stepfather Ron a photo of Scott with Amber. At this point, Sharon started to believe that Scott might have been involved in Laci's disappearance. In fact, it turned out that Scott and Laci's all-too-perfect relationship was far from that in reality. Obviously, Scott's romantic side was not exclusive to Laci. On January 17, 2003, it was revealed that Scott had been involved in 2 other affairs before Amber Fry, but no public information has been made available about his prior dalliances. On January 24th, Sharon, Ron, and Laci's brother Brent told the press that they were withdrawing their support for Scott, even though he hadn't officially been named as a suspect. Just hours later, Amber Fry held a press conference where she explained her role in the investigation.
Did your wife find out about it?
I told my wife.
When?
Early December.
Did it cause a rupture in the marriage?
It was not a positive, obviously. Inappropriate. But it was not something that we weren't dealing with.
A lot of arguing?
No, I can't say that even, she was okay with the idea. But it wasn't anything that would break us apart.
There wasn't a lot of anger?
No.
So far, Scott had lied about pretty much everything he told detectives, as well as Amber. So, who would believe that what he was telling about Laci's reaction was true?
Do you really expect people to believe that an 8.5-month pregnant woman learns her husband has had an affair and is saintly and casual about it? Accommodating? Makes a peace with it?
Well, you don't know. No one knows our relationship with us.
Laci's brother Brent revealed that Scott had admitted to him in a phone call on January 16, 2003, that he had been having an affair with yet another woman from Fresno during that time. However, by the end of January 2003, Scott was no longer communicating with the Rocha family. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no news about Laci. Her family and friends hadn't seen her smile for so long, and they just wanted to hear some good news, even when hope seemed to be lost. It was on April 13th, 2003, when a couple was walking their dog at Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park and saw something on the shoreline near the San Francisco Bay. They couldn't have witnessed a sadder scene. In front of them was the body of the dead fetus of a boy. It was in pretty bad shape, but the umbilical cord was still attached, although it seemed like it had been torn rather than cut properly, as it should be after a baby is born. Just a day after that terrible discovery, on April 14th, someone else found a woman's body on the rocky shoreline, about a mile away from where they found the baby. They could tell that this woman had been pregnant recently, but her body was in such bad condition that it was almost unrecognizable as a human body.
Wow.
She had been decapitated, and part of her limbs were missing, including most of her legs. It was a horrible sight. The police immediately sent the bodies for DNA testing. On April 18, 2003, the reports revealed that these were indeed the bodies of Laci and her unborn son Connor. To say that it was a heartbreaking discovery would be an understatement. The bodies were sent for autopsy in the hopes that they might be able to discover something that could explain what happened to them. Dr. Brian Peterson, who examined both bodies, reported that when he looked at Connor's body, he noticed that his skin was not decomposed at all, but the right side of his body had been injured. They discovered that there were 1.5 loops of nylon tape around the baby's neck, and that there were lacerations and cuts on his body. It was unclear if he was harmed intentionally, but a plausible theory was that he had come in contact with garbage while floating in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also, unlike what was reported earlier, the placenta and umbilical cord were not present with the baby during the autopsy. However, the medical examiners did find meconium in the baby's bowels, which is the first stool a baby passes after birth. As for Laci, Dr. Peterson said that they found a tape on her lower torso outside her clothing, and he further speculated she may have died from strangulation or smothering, but it was really hard to figure out when and how she died. Even though her head and neck were missing, along with her forearms and all internal organs except for the uterus, her cervix was undamaged. She did have 2 cracked ribs, but it could not be determined if they happened before or after her death. Her upper torso was devoid of internal organs except for her uterus, which protected the baby and kept it from decomposing as much as the rest of her body. Dr. Peterson concluded that the baby passed away inside Laci's body and was later expelled from her decaying body. When they found the bodies, the detectives, Brocchini and Bueller, knew that they had to act fast. They had placed a tracker on Scott's car and knew he was in San Diego at the time. They were worried he might try to escape to Mexico because San Diego was pretty close to the Mexican border. Scott was familiar with the area because his parents lived there, so he would not even need directions to get to Tijuana. The detectives weren't positive of Scott's guilt, but their years of combined experience was enough for them to know that he had something to do with all of this. He was definitely the main, in fact, the one and only, suspect in the case. The FBI and the local police searched Scott's home carefully. They even tested a hair they found on some pliers in his fishing boat. Later, they would find that the hair was a match for Laci's hair, which they found on her hairbrush. They also went through Scott's pickup truck, toolbox, warehouse, and boat. It was about time that investigators got some damning evidence against him. In his boat, they discovered a homemade anchor that Scott had made just 2 weeks earlier. He told them he used a 90-pound bag of concrete to make it, and used the rest to fix his driveway. When they searched Scott's warehouse, they found a cement-like substance on the wooden bed of a boat trailer. Detective Hendy, who was part of the investigation, noticed that there were 5 circular areas on the trailer that had less powder than the rest. He also found a dustpan with the same white powder and a sledgehammer. The evidence was not enough to prove that Scott was definitely the killer, However, officers believed that he had made 5 anchors and used 4 of them to sink Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay. Scott was arrested on April 13, 2003, near a golf course in La Jolla, where he was supposed to meet his father and brother for a round of golf. By then, he looked like a changed man, at least in physical appearance. He had dyed his naturally dark brown hair blonde, and his Mercedes was filled with all sorts of things like cash, Viagra pills, camping gear, clothes, 4 cell phones, and even 2 driver's licenses, his and his brother's. Scott's dad, Lee Peterson, explained that Scott had used his brother's license the day before to get a discount at the golf course. He also said that Scott had been living in his car because the media attention was too much. But the police believed that these things meant he was planning to run away to Mexico. On April 21, 2003, Scott made his first appearance in court in Stanislaus County. There he was charged with 2 very serious crimes: murder with premeditation and special circumstances. He pled not guilty. However, because so many people in Stanislaus County had already made their minds about Scott, the judge decided to move his trial to San Mateo County. Scott's trial began on June 1, 2004, with Rick DiStasso as prosecutor and Mark Garagos as defense attorney. The motive seemed clear enough to the prosecutors. A man killed his wife because she was in the way of his affair. He was tired of marriage. He could not handle the responsibility of being a father yet, and he could not manage the financial burden. The defense accepted that Scott was a 2-timer, but it was no reason to claim that he would murder his wife. They argued he would not have chucked this entire life he had for a masseuse mistress he had taken on only 4 dates. Since the investigators lacked any significant direct proof, the prosecution relied on circumstantial evidence. Several witnesses testified that Scott changed his appearance mere days after his wife's disappearance. He purchased a vehicle using his mother's name, and even added 2 adult television channels to his cable service within days. Neighbors were called in to establish that Scott told everyone that he had been golfing on December 24, 2002, not fishing. His financial status was also investigated, and it turned out that the couple had managed to accumulate $23,000 in credit card debt. The DNA hair match was also questioned. The defense pointed out that mitochondrial testing was not considered a reliable means of DNA comparison, but the prosecution knew what they were talking about. In fact, they claimed that Laci hadn't even seen the boat while she was alive. Speaking on behalf of Scott, attorneys theorized that someone kidnapped Laci, held her until she gave birth, and then dumped both bodies in the bay. But the medical examiners had already established that both Laci and the baby died at the same time. Finally, after hearing both sides, on November 12, 2004, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of murdering his own wife. On March 16, 2005, Judge DeLucchi addressed the court and called Laci and Connor's murders as cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Finally, the judge sentenced Scott to death by lethal injection and ordered him to pay $10,000 toward the cost of Laci's funeral. Scott reached San Quentin State Prison on March 17, 2005, very early in the morning. According to an officer, he didn't sleep the night before because he was too jazzed up. Scott was put in a special cell on death row. He would stay there for a few weeks while authorities figured out where his long-term placement would be. On July 5, 2012, Scott's defense team contested the death sentence and filed an appeal in the Supreme Court of California to overturn the decision on the grounds of unfair trial. Finally, on December 8, 2021, California Superior Court Judge Anne Christine Masulo upheld Scott's conviction, but ruled that he would be resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Laci. He also received a concurrent sentence of 15 years for the second-degree murder of Connor. Years passed by, but no one forgot Laci. On April 8, 2018, Ron Gransky, Laci's stepfather, who was like a second father to her, peacefully passed away in his sleep at his Modesto home at the age of 71. He had been facing health challenges for quite some time. Ron was laid to rest in the cemetery in Escalon, right next to Laci.
That is such a tragic story. May she rest in peace.